All right, welcome back. I'm Mackenzie Warren, news executive at Gannett Company, and I'm here with Ken Armstrong, who won this year's Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism at the Seattle Times, and we're going to talk about that story. Ken is a very decorated reporter. He was part of a Pulitzer Prize winning breaking news package in 2010. He's been a finalist 4 times, won the IRE award 5 times, the George Polk Award. It goes on and on. The John Chancellor Award for Lifetime Achievement in Journalism from Columbia University. He's been a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University here in Boston, where we are at the IRE Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference, and he spent a year as the McGraw Professor of Writing at Princeton University. So a guy with a tremendous amount of experience, and I really thank you for being here to talk about investigative journalism.
Well, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, I want to get into your background a little so folks can understand kind of where you come from and how you came to be doing what you do today, and then we're going to discuss a few of your different projects, a book project, and of course the Pulitzer winning story, and maybe a few others we'll get a chance to talk about. But you grew up in different parts of the United States and around the world. Tell us about your upbringing a little bit.
Yeah, I did. I bounced around quite a bit. I was born in Ohio, but we left when I was 3, and we moved to France, and from France we went to Germany, and we stayed in Germany until I was about 10 years old, and then we moved to New Mexico for the next 5 years, and from New Mexico we went to Indiana. My dad worked for the Defense Department, so with that came a lot of moving about, and it was fun for me because I got introduced to a lot of different cultures from an early age, and I think that's something that's helped, you know, in the years that came afterward.
So interesting, you've had all these perspectives, different angles, different cultures, things like that. You've also had a couple of experiences that maybe aren't common to a journalist. You tried law school for a while, the Peace Corps for a while in West Africa. You went to an engineering school, Purdue University, and yet you're a journalist after all that. So the question I have for you is, growing up in all these different places and dipping your toe in the water and all these different things, do you think that nonlinear path has done anything to equip you to be an investigative journalist?
I do, and you're being terribly diplomatic. You're right. When you say I tried law school and tried the Peace Corps, you mean I dropped out, which is, of course, what I did. You know, I tried law school for a year and found that it wasn't what I wanted to do. I went into the Peace Corps, and I realized I didn't have skills that actually translated to the Sahara Desert in West Africa, and I didn't have anything that would actually make life better for the folks there after 2 years. Whereas with journalism, I did have those kinds of skills, and I found that, you know, the more experiences you have in your past, the more it will help you as a reporter, because you're going to be dealing with people who are coming from all walks of life and who have all kinds of stories to tell. And the more you can relate to them, the better off you're going to be.
You know, as we were chatting earlier, you suggested that journalism used to be really open to taking in refugees from all these different types of life experience, and is that still the case, or is that something we need to do more of?
I worry about that. Some of the best journalists I know didn't have a bachelor's degree. Some of the best journalists I know studied journalism in the military. You know, they went into the military straight out of high school, and then they sort of drifted into the profession afterward. And they're fantastic. I worry that a lot of journalists now believe that a master's degree is the entryway to what we do. And I think something's lost when we don't bring in those refugees. I think refugees is a terrific word for it.
Well, it's sort of a real-life example of liberal arts education, I guess, and the values there. Well, as we were, you and I were corresponding, setting up this discussion, you know, I was trying to judge your interest and would you do this, and you shot back very quickly and very enthusiastically these words: "Man, anything we can do to explain why our work matters is all to the good." And I can feel in those words a certain degree of passion. And talk about, you know, a person that's done all the things you've done, accomplished all the things, had all the different accolades, had all the different opportunities. You've landed on journalism as your passion. Why is that?
Well, to me, there's something compelling about a job where you get paid for being curious. How many people get that opportunity? I had mentioned earlier, I spoke at my son's 7th grade class a week ago, and I told them some stories about what I did. And here was a group of 7th graders that were enthusiastic about it. And it's hard to get enthusiasm from a group of 7th graders.
Anything.
But that's right. but they understood that the work that we do is not only interesting, but that it actually has real life consequences, and that it makes a difference in our community. I've always thought that journalists don't do a very good job of spreading the gospel about the work that we do. We've always been sort of retiring and believe that it's important to be self-effacing. All of that is true, but right now we need to defend our relevance and let people know that we do make a difference in our communities and that this work needs to prosper.
Well put. Well, I want to talk about something that it may not be unique to you, but certainly unusual and characteristic of your work, and that is partnership. So you're the winner of the Pulitzer Prize this year, but you didn't do it alone. You worked with Mike Behrens on the Methadone story. Some great work that you did in Virginia, revealing the inner workings of a botched sting operation and all the consequences of that. You worked with a fellow named Bob Evans. Back at your days at the Chicago Tribune 10 or 12 years ago, your work in conjunction with the Medill, what's now called the Medill Innocence Project, you worked with Steve Mills to spring free 4 or 5 people, I think, from death row who were innocent, and that led to a moratorium on the death penalty. Pretty incredible move of policy. Based on your work, and you're the author of a book which I hope to talk about a little later, called Scoreboard Baby, which you co-authored with Nick Perry. So you did all this great work, but you didn't do it alone. There was always a co-pilot there. Talk about that, would you?
I almost never work alone, and I had an opportunity a couple of years ago to realize the extent of that. You'd mentioned the John Chancellor Award. I told the folks there that Princeton wanted to do a compilation of stories from people who have taught journalism there over the years. And what they asked for was a story that was 3,000 words or less that you had written alone. And I couldn't find anything. Everything I've done has been in collaboration with other reporters, and almost everything I've done has been longer than 3,000 words. So I was thinking, how lucky am I to have been able to work with all of these fantastic people over the years and to have been given so much space in the newspaper where it's hard for me to find a story that's under 3,000 words. But I'm constantly working with people where we have skills that complement each other. And those are the collaborations that tend to work the best. And I also find that collaborating is a lot more fun. You know, each new discovery, you have somebody to share it with. They understand the relevance of it and why it matters. And when it comes time to do the writing, you can bounce ideas off one another. It can be a very lonely process if you don't have someone to share it with. And for me, I try to find opportunities to pair up with other people.
Can you think of an example specifically where your skills and your partner's skills, exactly how did they complement, other than doubling the manpower and having a person that made the loneliness go away, the specific hard skills? Tell a story there that made the outcome better.
I think if you look at the Methadone project that was just published last year in Seattle, that's a good example. Mike Behrens is easily one of the top healthcare writers in the country, and he's just an outstanding database reporter. He has a very sophisticated understanding of these complicated fields. I don't. I'm more towards the Luddite end of technology, but I do have an appreciation for telling stories and finding ways to convert complicated material into forms where people can get it. So this was an example where we really complemented one another. You know, Mike was able to do reporting that would have defeated me, that baffled me, frankly. And I think I was able to find ways to take that information and put it in a form where people would read from, hopefully, the lead to the final sentence.
Sure. Well, let's talk about the Methadone story. In the state of Washington, which is facing budgetary pressures, as many other states are, your work revealed that the state was pushing doctors to prescribe a less expensive pain-killing drug, pain management drug, methadone. But but that drug has puts patients at greater risk. And in fact, almost 2,200 people in the state of Washington had died because of methadone overdoses, and vastly over-indexing on the poor. 48% of those who died from those ODs were Medicare patients. So you had sort of a cheap alternative that was killing people.
That's right.
But nobody knew that until you revealed it. And it took a lot of complicated analysis, and it took finding clues and taking cues that nobody else had followed. Why and how were you able to discover this trend where others hadn't and didn't?
Well, I think you could attribute it to the value of really knowing a subject well. And I'm speaking specifically about Mike. As I mentioned, Mike really is one of the top healthcare specialists around. Because of that, he will get emails and phone calls. Things will come across the transom to him that he is able to seize upon in a way that other people might not be able to. He received an email that was all but indecipherable from a doctor who was talking about what was going on in Washington, and he was able to see that there was potentially an important story here. And from there...
And it helped that he had that source to begin with.
It did. And from there, the challenge became writing about a subject that frankly is a little bit off-putting in the sense that it's data-rich, it's complicated, and we were writing about a state agency that meets in hotel conference rooms. You don't really have a lot of inherently interesting items that are intersecting here. So our challenge became, how do we write about this state agency, that has a name that you can hardly even say, and write about dots on a map? Because that's really what we were doing. We were taking these deaths, we were plotting them on a map, and then we were using overlays of poverty data so that we could show people that in those neighborhoods with the lowest incomes, that's where most of the deaths were occurring. I think for us, that was part of the challenge. It was writing it in a way that people got it, that they understood.
Now, the results of this, we won't know how many fewer people die from methadone overdoses yet. It's too early to tell. You just published the story a few months ago. But what we do know is that there's been a pretty dramatic shift in state policy here, and that's having other states and federally, there are going to be changes that because of this. So I'll go out on a limb and say somebody's life is going to be saved by this. Maybe dozens or hundreds or even thousands of lives will be saved by this. And as we were talking a little earlier, I was asking you about, whether you have an emotional investment in that outcome, or whether it's appropriate for you to have that because of what we've been taught about objectivity. And you seized on that word objectivity, and you think that that's been ill-defined at times.
I do. I think people sometimes confuse objectivity with a lack of passion, with being an automaton. And to me, our goal is to be accurate, fair, and transparent. It's not to work without passion, because if we don't care about a story, why are our readers? We're allowed to be invested. In fact, those are the stories that have always drawn me, the ones that I do care about it. And there's nothing inappropriate about that whatsoever. In fact, I'll use those same words, that's all to the good. If you care, it's more likely the readers are going to care.
It's really important to hear you make this distinction, because in our desire to be squeaky clean and not have anybody thinking that we have a stake in the outcome, and sometimes I think we're, as journalists, afraid to care, afraid to have an emotional attachment to the outcome of something. And I really appreciate the way you've explained it, because I think it's possible to be both fair and balanced, and also feel good about the good work that you've done. So, well, I want to hear a little bit more about your methods, because you seem to be able to do so much. What's your desk look like?
It has changed over the years. I used to work at a small paper in Twin Falls, Idaho, and they took a picture for the internal newsletter where they had predictions about how tall the piles would get and how much time would pass before everything would topple. And I look back at that picture from time to time, and you look at my desk now, and it is clean. I have things filed in an orderly fashion. I have things cross-referenced, cross-indexed. I have yellow stickies on everything. I guess from hard experience, I've learned over the years that there's value to being organized. And I can't claim to be the most organized person in the newsroom, but I'm starting in that direction.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that there's a common DNA to journalists, but I think that desk you just described in Twin Falls is something that exists in a lot of newsrooms even today, because the phone's ringing all the time and the cop scanner's going off, and you know, your assignment just changed, and you know, go chase this thing that's breaking, and,
right.
and that leads to these files.
It does.
And so it's just, and that leads to inefficiency, and then it's hard to do the complicated stories because where is that thing I'm looking for? Well, let's talk a little bit about your academic, academia ties. The Harvard experience as a Nieman Fellow, you were on, you could range all over the university and audit classes in the medical school and the law school and the engineering and the divinity and undergraduate and PhD level classes. So on one hand, you could just be this free-ranging student. And then there's the Princeton experience where you're teaching in this really distinguished post, trying to communicate to students about your passions. Talk about the campus life and how that, both as a student and a teacher, has informed your work as an investigative journalist.
Well, to me, the academic life is an open door, and it all is up to you what you do when you walk through it. When I was at Harvard, I had an opportunity to take any classes that I wanted. So I took classes in music, literature, architecture, philosophy. I tried to stay away from journalism because that's what I do every other year of my life, and that's what I would be doing when I returned to Chicago at that time. So for me, I wanted to make sure that I could expand, you know, into these other fields when the opportunity was there. When I was at Princeton, you're dealing with students who already have that opportunity, they're living that life. So what I did is I steeped them in the real life complexities that we deal with as journalists. And we reinvestigated an actual case. It was a case where somebody had been convicted and had been granted a new trial because of concerns about prejudicial arguments that the prosecutors had made. And I was able to get the defendant to come in and talk to the class so they could interview him. The prosecutor came in and they talked to him. An investigator who worked for the defense came in. They went out to the crime scene and they got to see the lay of the land and make their own decisions about what was important. And they studied hypnosis and the racial component of the criminal justice system. Then I had them write magazine stories about it. To me, it was important to take these students who deal a lot of times with abstract issues and ground them, you know, and show them that when you are studying these things, you're dealing with real people. And it worked out beautifully. Some of the students went much further than I ever expected them to. They went to the state prison in New Jersey and interviewed people on their own. So they really caught fire with it, which was very gratifying.
Well, picking up on that thread about writing magazine articles, the last thing I want to ask you about is your book, because magazine writing is a longer form of narrative writing where you can be more expository, and books all the more so, where you can really get into some character development. Now, your book, Scoreboard Baby, depicts the really ugly, corrupt, criminal underpinnings that were behind the University of Washington's Rose Bowl football run, and all the blind eyes that were turned toward a lot of bad things because the team was winning on the field. David Marinis praised this, the great reporter who won the Pulitzer Prize for national reporting, Richard Ben Creamer, who won the Pulitzer Prize for international reporting, and perhaps the endorsement that I found most impressive, Buzz Bissinger, who won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting back in Philadelphia and wrote Friday Night Lights, which I think most people know all about, and he said, "It was the most harrowing book I've ever read about college sports." That means a lot to me because his book was the most harrowing book I've ever read about sports and culture at all. So tell about writing that book and developing that story and being an investigative journalist over hundreds of pages with these multiple characters, and what opportunity that presents.
Yeah, I think one of the things about newspapers is you often find that there are side roads that intrigue you when you're doing the reporting, that because of the format, you're not really able to travel down. Because you know at the end of the project, you're going to be writing a 3-part series or a 4-part series. Space is limited, and you can only tell so many stories. With a book, you're able to go down those side roads. And we were really able to explain who was in the shadows during the season and who had been hurt and who was being neglected and forgotten. And that was an opportunity we didn't want to miss. We were also able to tell stories about things like academic dishonesty, what was going on at the university in order to preserve the eligibility.
People getting grades just because they were football players.
That's right. And we were able to go into depth with that because we were able to get the full academic files for a couple of players. So we were able to go through their transcripts and reveal what was in those records. We were able to talk about the injuries that these football players had suffered during their time at Washington and what were the long-term consequences for them as they approach middle age, as they get older. All of these were things that we were able to touch upon in the newspaper, but not really go into the kind of depth that we wanted. To me, books are invaluable in that way. And you mentioned Friday Night Lights. That's just a perfect example of it. That book is so relevant still to this day, and it's so emotionally moving because Buzz Bissinger went down all of those side roads. He spent a year, in that town, and he went down every side road imaginable, and the story reflects that. The book reflects that.
And not every journalist is going to get a chance to write a book, but these are the books that journalists need to read to get inspired to be better investigators, don't they?
It is, and even if every journalist isn't going to write a book, there are other things that they can do to stretch those writing muscles. You look at the byline, or you look at the atavist. There are opportunities now for people to incorporate video and audio and scanned documents into their storytelling in ways that were unimaginable, years ago. So to me, there's almost no format which isn't available right now for storytelling. You can tell a story in 3,000 words, 10,000 words, 40,000 words, 300,000 words. You can use audio, video, links to documents, whatever. It's time for us really to experiment and take advantage of these different tools that are out there.
Yeah, great. Well, that is, I think we should leave on that note. That's a great message. Ken Armstrong, I just want to thank you so much for spending some time here, offering some perspective and some advice for reporters and editors out there. You're doing a great job in Seattle, as we can see by all the plaudits that you've earned, and I just want to encourage you to keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, Mackenzie, and thanks again for having me here.
You bet.
Really appreciate it.
You bet. That's Ken Armstrong of the Seattle Times. We'll be back soon with more of these interviews from the Gannett IRE Salon series.